Using a UV filter or a clear filter to protect your lens. It is a contested topic in the photography space. And in this video, I'm going to tackle the reasons why people say they use them and the reasons why people say they don't. And I'm going to give you no BS on everything that people are saying. And we're going to just settle this once and for all. So without further ado, let's jump in and let's start with the reasons why people say they use these filters. Now, the main reason that people say they use them is to protect their lens, to protect the front element. Now, the reality is, yes, to some degree, using a filter will offer some protection. You cannot argue against that. You can't say that it never would protect it in any situation or circumstance. That would be naive to say that. Yes, to a degree, it does protect it. But the problem is people put too much weight on what kind of protection it actually will provide. And the biggest misconception that people have is that if their lens falls and the UV filter shatters, they think that if the UV filter wasn't on the lens, that would have been their front element that shattered. And that simply is not true. It is not true. In most situations, most scenarios, that front element would not have shattered even if you did not have the UV filter on there. So don't think that just because you have a filter, that is the sole reason why your front element didn't shatter when the filter did. Your front element is probably 4 or 5 or maybe more times thicker than an average UV filter. A UV filter is a very thin piece of glass. The front element on a lens is super thick. Look at a lens cutout of all the elements that are inside of a lens and look at how thick those pieces of glass is. For you to shatter a front element just off of a drop, it would likely have to be a very big drop. Now, of course, you can crack the front element if something hits it directly. So if a rock hit it directly or something like that, yes, you absolutely can crack a front element. You absolutely can shatter a front element, but it isn't likely to happen simply from you dropping your lens, unless it is a crazy drop, in which case, if it's enough to shatter your front element, it probably did more damage to the lens than just the front element. So that'll probably be the least of your worries. When you look at any lens, the weakest point on the lens, if one of the weakest points, if not the weakest point on a lens, is going to be the threads that you are threading that filter onto. Very weak. They bend very easily. So when you drop the lens, what is cracking your filter is not that the filter itself, the glass hit the ground or something hit the filter and shattered it. What it ultimately is when the lens hits the ground, those filters, because they're weak, they bend in. And when you have a filter, when they're bending in, what is happening? You have pressure on the rim of the filter. And when you have that pressure, it's got to go somewhere, goes to the glass, and then the glass cracks. So, does it provide protection? Yes. Does it provide anywhere near as much protection as most people think? Absolutely not. And if you take nothing else from this, take that just because that filter cracked does not mean your front element would have cracked. More than likely, it would not have. So another thing they say, it is better to constantly clean your filter than it is your front element, because you can have micro abrasions or scratches, or you can start to reduce the coating that's on your front element. Now, again, to a degree, obviously, this is true. Glass can be scratched. You definitely can have abrasions. So if you're constantly cleaning the front element, yes, over time, you will have abrasions. Over time, you possibly can reduce the coatings. But the reality is that is probably very minimally impacting anything that you're doing. If you had some micro abrasions, you're not likely to see it unless you were shooting at a very high aperture, or you had a scratch that was deep enough that if there was kind of a direct light source, that light hit that scratch and refracted and bounced light, and you got that. But for the most part, you wouldn't even see it anyway. So while it is true, yes, it technically would be better to clean a filter more so than it would be your front element. You're really worrying about a problem that isn't really going to be a problem. How often are you even cleaning your filter? or your front element, whichever. How often are you cleaning it anyway? It's not like you're just cleaning it all day, every single day. So it doesn't really matter. Now, a mistake that people make, and the reason why this is even a bigger problem than it has to be, is because people don't clean them the right way. Now, if you're a car enthusiast, you know that what Mr. Miyagi said to Daniel's son was not what you want to do. You don't want to wax on and wax off. You want to wax on and wax off. You want to go horizontally. You don't go in a circle because that's just going to create swirls, and you don't want that. So when you're cleaning your front element, should be the same thing. You don't want to be sitting here swirling, doing this here. You just want to, boom, swipe down. That's all you need. It doesn't take much. And another problem that people make is they go at it dry. If you've got dust or particles, or you were at the beach and you've got salt spray and you think you're just going to take a microfiber dry and just do it this way, of course, you're going to scratch it up, because what do you think is going to happen when you're rubbing dust and particles and salt on anything, any type of glass? It's going to scratch it. So you need to make sure you use some kind of liquid. Now, I use this Zeiss lens cleaner. Not that I care about it. It's just what I bought some years ago. I bought like 3 of them. But I actually also use distilled water a lot, because that works just as well. I do recommend distilled water if you're going to just use water, just because you just don't want all the minerals and stuff in there. It may not make a big deal, but that's what I use. I use distilled water if I don't use this cleaner. But if you spray that and then boom, 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 you're good to go. Now, the last thing that I hear for justification is that some lenses need a filter to complete the weather sealing. This is absolutely true. But there's not very many lenses that need this. Usually it is going to be your wide angle zoom lenses that are technically internal zooms. And if you look closely at those lenses, when you zoom them, the entire front element moves. And as it moves, there is an area where moisture and dust and that sort of stuff can get into that area. So you technically do need a filter to complete the weather sealing. It's absolutely true. That is true, but it is very few lenses, probably across all brands, that actually is the case. I've only seen it on wide angle zoom lenses. Most other lenses, that's not the case. You're either going to have the whole barrel that extends out, or you're going to have the entire mechanism enclosed. So now let's move on to the reasons why people say you shouldn't use a filter to protect your lens. Now, number one, and this is what you're going to get from most people that don't use filters and they're against filters: use a lens hood. This is going to provide more protection than a filter. I would say to a degree, in some situations, yes. 100%, no, right? So if you look at, you're at the beach and you have salt spray, if you don't want that getting on your front element because you don't want to have to clean that off of your front element all the time, guess what? This lens hood isn't going to change that. This isn't going to do anything for that. So in those situations, no, the lens hood is not going to be better protection than a filter. But aside from that, in general, yes, this is going to provide you more protection because really, when you think about it, number one, you have a lot of distance between your front element and this outside part. So that's always going to help. Number two, if you drop the lens, boom, it's going to hit that. Your lens hood's going to take a lot of the brunt of that impact. Obviously, it's going to break. It's going to take a lot of that impact. Another thing that's nice about this is when you're using this, it's protecting those lens threads that I was talking about that are very soft. It helps stop stray light from coming in. So I would say, yeah, for the most part, a lens hood is technically going to probably provide, in most cases, more protection than what that UV filter is going to do. Another thing you'll hear is that they degrade image quality and sharpness. Now, the reality is, regardless of the quality of the filter, if you're putting a filter in front of your lens, to some degree, it is going to degrade the image quality. And to some degree, it is going to reduce the sharpness. The thing is, if you have a good filter, it doesn't reduce it anywhere close to where you would really be able to notice. You really would have to look at 2 images side by side and pixel peep. If you do that, you may be able to spot some differences. But for the most part, that is not really an issue. It isn't anything to be concerned about. So people push that as if, that's just a strong reason not to use UV filters. And the reality is, if you get a quality filter, a quality glass filter, don't mess with plastic filters, because if you get a plastic filter, those cheap plastic filters, they're going to definitely degrade your image. There's no doubt about it. But if you get a nice, high quality glass filter, for the most part, it's not going to degrade your image enough to where you would be able to notice it. Now, I say for the most part because you're always going to have these situations and scenarios. There's somebody right now that's like, no, I've got to look at this right here. Yes, in some situations you may have to where it's a little bit more noticeable. But again, you really don't notice unless you have two side by side. If it was so bad, you would be able to look at just an image and be like, man, did you have a filter on your lens or what? Because this is looking really soft. That isn't the case. You can tell when you have something to compare it to, but outside of that, no. So if you get a quality one, it doesn't really degrade it that much. But yes, technically it does. You're putting another piece of glass in front of your lens. Yes, technically it does degrade it, but nothing that you would really have to worry about if you get a quality one. Another thing you hear is that they increase flare or ghosting or light streaks. Absolutely true. Absolutely true. Regardless of what type of coatings that they have on those filters, they absolutely will increase ghosting and flares. It is what it is. Okay. It is what it is. They will increase it. Now, it's not going to be in every situation. Sometimes, the light has to hit a certain kind of way, but absolutely using a filter will increase the odds of you having flare and ghosting that you would otherwise not have had or not have had to the severity if you didn't have a filter on there. It's true. That's it. It's true. Now, I've also heard that people will say don't use them because there can be a color shift. Now, I personally have never seen this. Now, granted, most glass is not truly clear. Okay, most glass does have some sort of tint to it, especially when you have coatings. There is going to be some sort of tint, but for it to be enough to create a color cast, I personally have never seen it. So the people that are saying that, they might have had some odd situations or scenarios where that was the case. I've never seen it. That really isn't a reason to justify not using it. Again, if you use a quality, high quality glass filter, even with coatings, that really is a non-factor. It certainly wouldn't be anywhere near the case as you get when you use some ND filters. So it really isn't anything to even think about or fret over. And the last thing that you'll hear is digital cameras don't need UV filters. And that is true. They don't. Film cameras tend to need it. Digital cameras, for the most part, there's kind of a UV filter built into some part of the sensor. So yes, that is true. But that's kind of a moot argument because I don't personally know anyone that's ever bought a UV filter because they actually wanted to try to block UV. Most people, they get UV filters, they get them because they're readily available, but their whole intent is for it to just be lens protection, not because they actually are concerned about blocking UV. So anytime I hear anyone say that, I'm like, that's just somebody that's just trying to argue a point just for the sake of arguing a point, because nobody's out here buying UV filters because they want to block UV. I mean, seriously. There technically are clear filters that you can get that are marketed as protection filters, and they're supposedly a bit cheaper. I've never looked it up. I don't really know, don't really care, but that does exist. So if you want to save a few pennies, you probably can just get clear protection filters. So that is that. Now, with all that being said, I have UV filters on every lens that I own. And they've been on it. Every time I buy a lens, I buy a UV filter at the same time to put on it. Now, I use UV filters because I just like to use UV filters. I'm OCD like that. I just want to, have something in front of the lens. I don't want to have to be wiping down my lens all the time. It's just what I choose to do. And I've done thorough tests. I use B&W filters, UV filters on every lens. That's the only brand that I use. I've done rigorous testing, and I've not seen any image degradation at all, certainly that I would care about. So I just use them because that's just what I want to do. And at the end of the day, if you want to use UV filters to protect your lens, Use UV filters to protect your lens. It doesn't freaking matter what anybody else thinks. If you want to use them, use them. If you don't want to use them, don't use them. You using filters doesn't impact the person that doesn't want to use them. And you being the person that doesn't want to use them and think that no one should use them, you're not being bothered by someone that is using them. So there really is no point in even having the conversation. If you want to use it, cool. If you don't. There's positives and there's negatives to using them and not using them. So you just have to decide, are the pros, do they outweigh the cons, or do the cons outweigh the pros? And you make your decision from that.